everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I see my lower third appears to have appeared. So that's nice. Oops, I lost my screen. One sec, I'm getting the hang of this, obviously. As we carry on. No, still haven't been able to find where the comments are via the YouTube interface here, but I'll try and keep an eye on the comments, so hopefully we can get the question and answer portion of the show to actually work this week. How are you guys? Hopefully you are doing well. There we go. Ta-da. So, welcome to the second episode of the Cult of Copy live web show. I am your host, the Reverend Dr. Sir Colin D. Terrio, Pontifex Maximus of a secretive organization known as the Cult of Copy. Currently we have a discussion group available on Facebook if you would like to join us there at cultofcopy.com. Although I will admit, if you join the group without having friends via Facebook who are already members of the group, I kind of put you on a back burner list, which is currently 100 members deep, but we've been having some spam problems, so I got to go through them manually. Anyway, that's my problem and not yours. But we discussed the darker side of persuasion, copywriting, marketing, that kind of thing, exploring the world of basically anything that we can look at to learn new and interesting tricks about persuasion and that sort of stuff. Today, we are going to talk about heroes, mythical heroes, religious heroes, even comic book superheroes, in an effort to see what we can learn about origin stories of superheroes, what is relevant to us in the world of marketing that we can sort of co-opt so that our customers, prospects, clients, various other people, competitors even, will all see us as obviously having superhuman abilities and making it valuable to want to hire us to save the day, as it were. So if you give me one moment to open my notes here. Ta-da! They were open, but since I upgraded this doohickey here to iOS 7, it constantly wants to refresh every time I reopen something. A little bit about the show, since I already told you who we are and what we do. This particular show is a weekly web show. New episodes are recorded live via Google Hangout at our web channel on YouTube, which is youtube.com/user/cultofcopy. New episodes are recorded Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and eventually, once I get a little bit of an archive of these, we will start turning them into a podcast available on iTunes, Android, whatever else is available, Zune, I don't know. If you get a chance and you like what you hear, subscribe via whatever channel it is that you prefer to watch these. Recordings of the live sessions are also available as a video via YouTube. I just don't know how interesting those are since you're just sort of staring at me talk. Back to the topic at hand. Superheroes. Who doesn't like superhero comic books? Lots of people, I guess. I don't know. You can't really see it, but there are posters up here of the Star Wars cover from the Marvel Comics adaptations. Let's see. Amazing Fantasy number 15, which is the first appearance of Spider-Man, and over there I have Action Comics number 33, the cover as a poster, and that is the first appearance of Superman. We'll talk about both those guys in a minute. But first, let's talk about where these sort of underlying superhero stories come from and why people are so fascinated with them. It's not just a childish thing necessarily, because if you've been paying attention to movies that have come out in the past few years, superhero films have been immensely profitable and valuable, and part of that has to do with nostalgia, the fact that a lot of these characters have been around a long time. That's important too. But there's something about these characters that resonate with people no matter what their age, no matter what time period we're in, because like I said, a lot of these characters began their life in the 30s, as far back as the 30s, like Superman, all the way up to, I think Spider-Man was in the late 50s. They sort of reframe these stories as each new generation comes along, and the older people kind of quit maybe buying comic books every week, and new kids come along and they kind of reframe the story to fit in a modern context. You can even see it with the Spider-Man movies, even though they just had 3 of them, I think they were all within the 2000s. They've just rebooted it, and the second Amazing Spider-Man movie is about to come out. And they did the same thing, basically. Tobey Maguire played a high school student in the original series. I believe he was like a senior in the first one, and he was in college in the next 2. But they rebooted it, and he's like, surprise, Peter Parker's a teenager again. So these stories are kind of endless. Not endless, what's the right word? Timeless. That's the word I was going for. These stories are kind of timeless, and they sort of reset them every once in a while, and they do the same thing in the comic books too. It's not just in the movies. But the source material for these stories really reveals how it is that they survive in this kind of immortal state. And the truth is, hero stories are very, very ancient as far as humans are concerned. Some of the oldest stories we have written records of are hero tales, epic poems about the achievements of demigod-like heroes who usually, come to the defense of the people whose story it is and rescue them from some terrible villain or circumstance or a series of those kind of things. The trick with myths, people know myths and legends of heroes and things. And again, you can't see it, but underneath those posters is a big wall full of books on mythology and legends and folklore and things like that, just because I'm sort of interested in the topic. The thing about those stories is they really do have a lot of things in common, no matter what culture they come from. And I believe he was a sociologist. I apologize for not getting his discipline right if I don't, but there's a famous guy named Joseph Campbell who wrote a few books, one of which is called Hero with a Thousand Faces, and another is called The Power of Myth. And what his work entailed was looking at all of these different stories from around the world and looking at these hero legends, these oldest stories that we know of in any given culture, and looking for the things they had in common. And he called this the monomyth, the single story that every person on Earth from any point in time can sort of say, oh yeah, that's real similar to this hero story from my cultural heritage, right? Years and years, decades maybe even later, this guy, Christopher Vogler, wrote a memo for Disney. He was a screenwriter. He wrote a memo for Disney sort of taking Campbell's ideas and compressing them down to a formula that they could use in their stories, because as you know, Disney takes public domain fairy tales and these cultural stories and sort of re-engineers them to be cartoony and palatable and fun and exciting for the whole family to attend. But he took some of the elements from Campbell's hero's journey story and sort of laid them out so that they could be used in screenplays. Suffice to say, if you know the underlying story, you can see how basically every Disney animated hero film, whether it's a princess or a male lead like Hercules or Aladdin, they all follow these same underlying hero structures that sort of give you the beginning of the character. They build up to, you know, the mantle of herodom is offered to them, and they turn it down. They're humble. They don't want it, but then something terrible happens. Something they love is taken from them. Then they have to put themselves out there and put on the mantle of the hero and sort of become this driving force in the story, right? And I mean, that's in everything from like Snow White and Cinderella all the way up to Frozen, right? And I mentioned I have a Star Wars poster. Star Wars, George Lucas specifically mentions Joseph Campbell's work as being an inspiration for him to create the story of Star Wars. All of that being said, today we're going to talk about the deal with myths is that a myth and a legend is just a story from, I guess you would call it a religion, that's just outdated and no one really follows it. So Greek myth, you know, all these stories of Hercules and Odysseus and Achilles and all these guys, all of these stories are what used to be part of a religion, right? They involve gods and immortals and all of these kind of things. They were religious stories at one point. Some people actually believed at some point that Zeus was a real being. And if he didn't like you, he would, you know, throw lightning bolts at you or whatever. But as those things sort of fell away, nobody believes in them. They fall out of favor. We keep the stories because the stories are still good, but no one necessarily believes in the underlying reality of it. So we're going to look at myths. We're also going to look at a little bit of religion, because all religion stories are myths that a lot of people currently believe are true. No fault to anybody who believes in that kind of thing. And then again, we're going to revisit comic book superheroes and see how ancient, vibrant, deeply connected things like myths and legends and currently, you know, sort of mythical, magical narratives about why the world is the way that it is, that people follow in religion. We'll see how those two things have kind of merged into what we think of as the comic book superhero. And all of that in a roundabout way to say, what is it about the comic book superhero that we can capitalize on to use for your business? Why is that important? Why is it relevant? And again, I'm attempting to view the comments live, so if you have a question or a comment about anything we're talking about while it happens, I'm going to check these before the end of the show, so if you type it into the comment box where you're watching, I will try, technical difficulties aside, to see if we can actually get into answering them. So before we get into that stuff, why is this relevant? Why does this matter? Why is it valuable to us as guru-type marketing internet figures in whatever field we happen to be in? The reason I think it's important to look at things like comic books is because, like I said, Superman's been a persistently profitable character that people collect and follow and read more and more about since like the 30s. Spider-Man since the 50s. Any of the Marvel characters have been around since like the 50s and 60s. DC characters even older, back to the 30s and 40s. These characters help sell serial adventures, right? They're stories that happen in sequence that people keep paying attention to. And of course, if you've ever read comic books, you know that they have a lot of advertisements in them. So in addition to selling subscriptions to actually subscribe to the comic book and read it, they make money by selling advertisements inside of these print publications. In the modern era, comic books continue to be sold. They're not as popular in print as they used to be, but they still sell them digitally. And of course, the programs that people use to read them do also still serve ads. And then, like I said, they've evolved, and now those same characters are big billion-dollar movie industry characters making lots of money for the people who own the rights to those characters. So you being a guru figure in your market, looking at elements of characters that keep people coming back for more, that want to pay attention to what those characters are doing over and over and over again, is very, very valuable. And The trick with superheroes is they're all good guys, right? Um, so obviously the audience associates with them, and they express some sort of worldview that the audience can identify with, and depending on what you're into, that'll kind of determine what kind of superhero you're into. They don't stress on it so much, but like when Iron Man was originally created, he was a war veteran. Same thing with Captain America. Those figures of war veterans were very popular during, World War II, because people would connect with it. They were like real life heroes that they just sort of took to the next level. And then you have like a character like Spider-Man, who is a clumsy, nerdy teenager in real life. People associate it with it that way, but then he has superpowers too. So you get to have like that fantasy of being like, what if me as a nerdy kid, just like Peter Parker, had powers like Spider-Man? It gets you. I think it gives you that vicarious sort of element that we talked about in the last episode about personas, where people can look into those characters' lives and see a little bit of themselves, but then enjoy adventures and experiences that they themselves don't actually get to have. Nerdy kids could look at Spider-Man and see Peter Parker get beat up by bullies and say, oh, I know what that's like. But then Peter Parker gets to go swing from the rooftops with the spider webs and beat up bad guys and be the hero. They don't know what that's like, but through the comic book, they get to experience it. And that happens in a lot of different contexts. So again, that's pretty valuable for any business, is that you can almost think of it as like a split nature, right? Because superheroes have their superpowered life, but every superhero has that secret identity, right? Like they have a few postmodern superheroes that are like, oh, we're playing with the format, and they do some neat things where like the superhero always is the superhero, but every classic superhero that people know, Batman, Superman, Iron Man, Spider-Man, all those guys, they have a secret identity. They're the superhero on one hand, but then who they really are is a secret that is closely guarded. The audience is in on it and knows the whole deal and is kind of watching over their shoulder, but the people in that character's universe don't know. And that setup is very, very powerful for audiences. So last week when we talked about personas, I talked a lot about how you have your authority positioning, where you're an expert in what it is that you do, but you share all these things that bring people into your real life, right? The secret identity behind your superhero persona. And that scenario, that presentation, people really love it because they're looking for someone who has the skills that can save them. No matter what it is you're an expert in, if people are coming to you for advice or expertise or service or knowledge, they're coming to you because you're an authority figure, right? You're knowledgeable, you're an expert. But who they're going to choose to go with is the guy that they can relate to, or gal. Again, sorry, male pronouns. I'm biased being a male. But there's lady superheroes too. Not good ones. That's neither here nor there, but Wonder Woman's kind of a cheesecake character. Anyways, I digress. I can nerd out about superheroes a lot, obviously. Where was I? Oh yeah, letting people into your secret identity makes you seem more real, and it lets them associate with you on a peer level where they can connect with you and feel like, hey, I'm like that guy, we're connected, we're the same. Except he also has this day job where he's awesome and superpowered and fights bad guys the way that I wish I could in my own life. So that's the underlying reason why I think these characters are so resonant, but also valuable for us to pay attention to as marketers and business owners. So as promised, let's roll it back a little and look at myths and legends and then sort of religious heroes. Now, we're already about halfway through the show, so I'm not going to dive super deep into it, but this is part of a talk. If you've ever seen me give my superhero storytelling talk, which I've done in a couple of events, this comes from that. I've, like I said, I have a bookshelf full of books on myths and legends. Looked at tons of mythological heroes, tons of religious figures, and sort of the two best ones. We're going to look at one mythical character and one sort of religious fable character, and look at the elements of each of those types of characters and see how they fold into superheroes. So first we go to myth, Greek myth. Zeus is the father of the gods. He's got all his brothers and sisters. They're all children of the Titans. Lots of complicated stuff going on. But anyway, they're immortal and awesome and superpowered and have control over all kind of elements of nature and can change shape and size and all kinds of crazy superpowers, right? Basically, everything Superman can do, but like way, way more. And then they got this guy Prometheus, and he's immortal. And at this time, this is sort of like in the prehistory of Greek myth. So there's no civilization. They're not like building palaces and temples or anything like that. Alexander isn't conquering all of the known world as a Greek citizen. None of that stuff has occurred. This is like primitive, almost cavemen type people. And what Prometheus does is he loves humanity and their potential, and he wants to help them. So he goes to the gods and sneakily steals the secret of fire from the gods and gives it to humans. And the trick is that was like the first domino in the line of creating modern civilization. Once they had fire, then they could cook their food, and then they could, make better materials. They can make metals. They can make clay and bake it into pots, and all kinds of crazy things happen. Once they had metal tools, then they could work stone, and so on and so forth. Basically, he gave them the tools of civilization, and this enraged Zeus and the other gods, because now all of a sudden the mortals, with their potential, could have the same power as the gods, because he had given them fire, the secret of fire, how to make it, how to harness it. As punishment, they took Prometheus and chained him to a rock. And every day, an eagle would come down and like disembowel him and eat his entrails. I think like specifically his liver or something, which, as you can imagine, excruciating, very gory. Ancient fables have a lot of really gruesome things in them. But Prometheus being immortal, what would happen is it would grow back, and then the next day the eagle would come and eat it again. And he was just chained to this rock, supposedly for all eternity, for punishment for giving mankind fire, which made the gods super, super pissed off. Eventually Hercules, who everybody has heard of, Hercules comes and rescues him, so don't worry about him. But there are a few elements of this story that are super resonant and make it just such a potent origin story to incorporate those elements into what it is that you do. So first of all, there are the gods, quote unquote. They are the figures at the very top of your industry, let's say, the veterans, the grandfathers, the titans that dominate over your particular industry. If you want to fulfill the role of Prometheus, you are going to discover and sneak away their secrets to share them with your audience, the shortcuts to having this godlike power that these massive, well-respected, seemingly omnipotent figures have. You're going to steal those secrets, and you're going to share them with your audience. The elements of Prometheus' story that really, really resonate are that you yourself are superior in some way. Like Prometheus was an immortal. You're more advanced than your audience is, but you just like them, right? You're on their team, not on the team of the immortals. You're an immortal who's sort of gone rogue, and you're on their side. You're with the underdog secretly, and you're stealing the good stuff from the gods under threat of some kind, right? Like if they knew I was sharing this with you, I would be ostracized. I would be shunned. I would be exiled, maybe even punished in some kind of way, right? Like there's threat that could damage you, but like you don't care because you like your audience so much. You're going to take the secrets of the gods and share them for the benefit of mere mortals without any concern for your own safety. Just that aspect alone is something that most audiences can connect with, because everyone kind of has that fantasy of like sticking it to the man, you know, and having someone working on your behalf to sort of steal the secrets of the gods and use it against them for your own benefit. That clicks with so many people on a deep level. Another thing about Prometheus that like resonates with people is the fact that he did get caught. It wasn't like he got away with it. It's not really a heist picture. Like, he sacrificed himself for the good of people who were, you know, obviously inferior to him. And he did it because it was the right thing to do. He felt like it needed to be done without a care for, you know, his comfort or well-being, I guess you would say. That has a very, very powerful effect on people. And that's kind of the story of Prometheus. Obviously, once you know that mythical story, you can see it over and over again in popular fiction and self-help, and even in everyday life. There's a reason that story resonates with people that it survived on through countless, you know, centuries of oral history before somebody finally wrote it down, and then it's been written and rewritten many, many times since then. Then for the second part of all of the stuff that I've studied that I think is like the go-to story, in Buddhism, this is where we get into the religious part. And again, I'm not a Buddhist. I just kind of studied Buddhism as a academic pursuit in college as a class. So I apologize for anybody who might be a devout Buddhist if I'm getting any of this wrong. Consider this a layman's understanding, but what's important is how we apply it to what we're talking about. So in Buddhism, the equivalent of a saint that you would have like in Catholic and other Christian variants is called a bodhisattva. And to sort of back up a little, in Buddhism, we're all stuck in this constant cycle of rebirth and death. And basically, as long as we're obsessed with things in the material world, we will be doomed to constantly be reborn into it. And, you know, you have karma, stuff like that, that says, you know, if you're a bad person, you get reborn as a lower life form as kind of punishment until you figure things out. The goal of all of that is what's called nirvana, which is like enlightenment, right? So after many, many lifetimes of being good and doing what you're supposed to do and meditating and isolating yourself and, you know, being taking all the right actions, disconnecting from the material world, meditating, purifying yourself, literally lifetimes and lifetimes of doing this, you achieve what's called nirvana. You escape from the cycle of rebirth and redeath. Your soul is free. You're never going to be reincarnated again. It's great. You return to like the oneness of the cosmos, erasing yourself forever and being, you know, truly free and living in joy and all that. So it's equivalent of what Westerners think of as heaven, though, I don't know, much more vague, you know. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go to heaven and meet all the people I love. You're just like, oh, I'm at one with the universe and I'm pure energy, and none of that stuff even matters. It's all an illusion. Anyway, that gets a little mumbo-jumbo. The idea is what a bodhisattva is a person who has achieved the state of nirvana and escaped the cycle of samsara, rebirth and death and reincarnation, right? But rather than escape to it and enjoy it, they feel obligated to come back, or stay, I guess, because you don't go anywhere, just reside in the material world until all living creatures with a consciousness can achieve nirvana and escape, right? So it's a very like super noble, super altruistic worldview that you've literally escaped the material world and all of its traps, but yet you won't enjoy the fruits of having been awesome and been, you know, a superhuman, multi-generational soul who has figured all this out. You're just going to go ahead and come back and help people advance. Now, depending on like Buddhism is one of those religions like Christianity where there are like a million subvariants as it spread across history and geography. Many of these bodhisattvas, like if you ever seen like a skinny Buddha, you know, like a lot of Buddhas are fat and then some of them are skinny, some of them look different, maybe they have different poses, like there's a famous Buddha with his thumbs held out. All of these are actually bodhisattvas. Buddha just means enlightened one. So there's the Buddha who started the religion, and then there are tons of other Buddhas or bodhisattvas that have achieved nirvana through what the Buddha recommended, and then came back and became these venerated saints where people sort of, it's like the equivalent of praying to him. It's like, well, I have stuff to do, so I can't drop out of the world and move to a monastery and meditate and then like be reborn over and over and do that for a few generations until I figure that all out. So I'm going to do this chant, and I'm going to leave you like a little, you know, offering at your altar at some temple, and the idea is that you're going to work your magical bodhisattva powers from beyond and help me get closer to nirvana on my behalf, because I'm like praying to you for it, right? So these bodhisattvas are like an intercessor, I guess you would call it. And again, you probably are already noting a lot of similarities to that story of Prometheus. The deal with these bodhisattvas is they offer kind of these shortcuts, and they're these compassionate, altruistic figures. And the reason that's important for marketing is you always want to have a reason beyond profit, beyond screwing over the gods, while you're bringing this stuff back to your audience, while you're sharing it. It should be like a good reason, a noble reason, that even though you've achieved these lofty heights that are really the ultimate goal of everyone, there's a reason you're turning around and coming back and holding out your hand to help people beyond profit, beyond self-satisfaction, beyond being an expert. And if you go back to the previous episode where we talked about personas and all these motivators and things that you share about yourself, your actual life, your values, those are the things that connect with people, and they're like, oh, well, that's why he's coming back to share with us. You know, it's not solely because he wants to make money off of us and he's an expert and he knows what we want. It's about caring. There's caring there. There's altruism. There's empathy. There's commonality. There's us versus them out there. And that to me is an interesting aspect of the bodhisattva, that they're like, I figured it all out. I did it. I won. But now I'm coming back to help everybody win. Combine that with Prometheus, and you have basically, that's kind of the prototype of almost every superhero in a nutshell. But those two aspects are just extremely, extremely powerful. If you hit those points in your origin story, whatever that may be, you have tons of opportunity to deeply connect with and resonate with people. Now, I know a huge portion of my audience is not nerdy on history and religion and sociology and things like that. Those are, I know, pretty advanced esoteric subjects that most people don't really dig into. But what people do know, what people are familiar with, especially, again, because of the recent, you know, since the late 80s, superhero movies have been like a big thing that have grown and grown and grown until, you know, you got the Avengers that's making multiple billions of dollars, or the Batman franchise would be another example. But lots more people are familiar with those comic book superheroes when it comes to these elements. So I have a list that I made in my notes of these superhero elements we're going to talk about. I'm still not seeing any comments or questions. I don't know if that's because it's malfunctioning or maybe no one has any questions. Either way, feel free to ask any, and I will hit refresh now and then. So, superheroes. We're going to talk about a few of the more famous superheroes out there and what aspects of their character can be used in different situations depending on your own situation as a business leader, as an expert, as a guru who's trying to make yourself into a personality online that an audience can line up behind. First one we're going to start with is the granddaddy of all superheroes, Superman, right, doesn't get more elemental than that. It's one of those where he literally is the template for every superhero who ever came after. He wears the cape. He can fly. He's more powerful than other humans. He's strong. He's bulletproof. He's handsome. He's charming. And he's got a secret identity. Like literally every superhero copies off of Superman because he's the prototype, right? So what is the deal with Superman? Basically, he's a big blue Boy Scout. He's an all-powerful alien from outer space who cares about humans only because he happened to be raised by nice, salt-of-the-earth farmer-type people from the middle of Kansas, right? So he's raised by good Americans with good hard work and values, and that's the only reason why this nigh omnipotent alien decides to be a superhero anonymously and rescue people as opposed to, like, I don't know, taking over the earth since no one could stop him. So if you're in a position in your market where the people you're selling to, that you're marketing to, are literally beginners, and compared to them you have like godlike superiority, Superman is a good guy to look at because that's kind of where he is in the comic books, right? So he guides with a gentle hand. He's never a bully. He's never mean. He's aware that he could destroy anyone with like a flick of his wrist, or he could like break your bones by like blowing on you or whatever, cut you in half with his heat vision. He never does those crazy things. He always operates with this measure of restraint and gentleness and understanding. And when you're in a position like that where your actual expertise is light years beyond the audience that you're trying to reach, that's the way you want to do it. You want to be very benevolent, very humble, very understanding, not condescending. That can be hard to pull off, but you're not flaunting it. You're really keeping it down to their level, and they know you're amazing, but you're just sort of keeping it in check. I feel like when I read things where regular sort of people have gotten to interact with a guy like Richard Branson, they kind of get that Superman vibe where like, oh my God, this guy's like a super billionaire, but he's just a very chilled out regular guy when you meet him. You hear the same thing kind of about Bill Gates too, or Warren Buffett. That I feel like they're kind of in that Superman role. So you have that gentle guidance, and the trick with Superman is when we talked in the last episode about villains, the things that you fight, the things that you stand against. When you're in that Superman role, there are like huge villains that you fight against, really big negative things that are, these are my bad guys, these are the things that I fight against. You look at a figure like Oprah. Oprah tackles like kind of really big issues, she used to on her show, like really nasty things that plague society, drug addiction, child slavery. I think she had an episode on all these like really extremely terrible bad guys that she uses her superhuman stature to stand up against, right? Like, you don't need to be fiddling with, local tax codes or anything if you're one of these monumental figures that you're trying to portray yourself as. You need big, 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 big bad guys if you're going to pull off the Superman role. Another trick with Superman, we mentioned like the restraint, right? To have that Superman attitude, it's about mercy. So even when you're fighting these big evil bad guys, you don't stoop to their level. You don't get dirty. You don't get mad. You just do what's right. And then when you fight them, you're like, well, you're always like kind of understanding of the bad guy's position. You're merciful. You would rather them like rehabilitate. You're never like, oh, those guys are the scum of the earth and we should kill them all. That's not a Superman attitude. That's not going to portray that noble heroism. There are character types where you can play that role if that's what you want. You're just not going to be able to pull off the Superman if you're not merciful in your power. And then, of course, Superman is well known for having his ethics and his integrity and his moral code. That's his compass. It's why he does what he does. So, again, to go back and mention religion, a lot of political figures, even some, prominent business figures will reference their religious faith as their moral compass. And most of the time they're just patronizing their particular audience. They're pandering to gain the trust and and admiration of people of that particular religion. But I digress. The point of it is they have this code of ethics. Superman was for truth and justice and the American way. That's what he dedicated his power to, not anything that would ever violate those things. So he was never cruel. He was never malicious. He was just supporting truth and justice. He used his power purely for good because he had this code that meant a lot to him. Again, and it came from his upbringing. You only know this about him because you know the story. He was raised by Ma and Pa Kent on the farm in Kansas, right? So because you know that about him, you get it. You get why he's a good guy, which is odd because it's really weird when you watch a Superman movie. Think about what the people who live in Superman's world must think of him. He must be like constantly mysterious because they don't get to see that secret identity that the audience gets to see, right? You're like, well, here's this all-powerful alien, and I guess he's being nice to us now for some reason. I don't know why he would continue to be. We'll have to take his word for it, or else he'll cut us in half with his heat vision. But I digress. You get the idea. Superman is just, everyone can trust him, and the readers can trust him because they know his humble background. That's why that secret identity and sharing it with your audience is so important. That's how they know you're on their side. So that's Superman. And again, if anybody has questions, please let me know. Ad spots. James just asked about ad spots. I'm barreling through this episode. I skipped the ad spot. I should have done one about 15 minutes ago. I don't currently have anything on offer, which is why I didn't do a house ad. And we're still building up the audience and getting the show going. But we do normally have advertising spots in the show for my own stuff. And we will swap them out for other offers at a future date. He asked what the rates were. I don't know yet, but we will have them, since hopefully lots and lots of people will eventually be paying attention to the show. Moving on, though. Next we have Captain America. Captain America is like kind of a different company's attempt to make a big blue Boy Scout like Superman, but in a different genre. So Captain America is a soldier. He has a sense of duty, much like Superman, I guess you could say. But the trick with Captain America is that even though he has godlike superpowers, he used to be weak. He used to know what it was like to get beat up and picked on in a way that Superman really never has. He was born with superpowers. Captain America had to take like a super soldier serum to make him from a tough wussy into a tough strong guy, right? But he always remembers his roots. Like if you watch the Captain America movie or you read the comic books, he talks about he's just a kid from Brooklyn. He's just a regular guy with a good heart. He's brave and true and trustworthy as a person, and then he got superpowers. So that's really kind of the underlying Captain America idea, is that you can really relate to where your audience is coming from because you used to be like them, and then something happened to you that turned you into a superhero, but you have this duty to come back and defend people in the position that you used to be in, to help them, to, I guess, advance them, help them progress. Another thing about Captain America, it amazes me how they've managed to continuously update the idea, because he's tied to a very old concept of patriotism. And in fact, the character of Captain America is really old, was this wartime character, sort of died out in popularity after World War II. And then they kind of resurrected him literally in the comic books by saying, well, he got frozen in the ice on a mission and we brought him back to life. And they've done that in the movies now, where his first movie takes place in World War II, where he's fighting Nazis. And then he also gets to be fighting aliens in modern time because he got frozen and they thawed him out. But because of that, he stands for tradition. He sort of represents this older idea of values. And again, you can see this a lot in politics. Everybody talks about a return to traditional values, back the way it used to be, back the way the founders intended it, and all of this sort of pandering to this idea of tradition and history. And this works very well in niches that have that kind of history. You can be a figure that's dedicated to that tradition, right? Like, let's say cooking. Cooking is a good example of a field that has this value and loyalty to being dedicated to a traditional standard. And a lot of times, you'll see trends come where people move away from that, and you can represent yourself as the figure that represents a return to that. Like, that's your core from which all your superpowers flow. And again, Captain America is a soldier, so he has this duty of service, and he has that element of Prometheus where it's about sacrifice, right? He's giving something up to be this figure to his audience. Those are some elements from Captain America that you might be able to use in your business. Next, we have the Hulk. Now, the trick with the Hulk, I talked about before, like, you don't have to be the good guy like Superman. You don't have to be kind and merciful. The Hulk is about rage. The Hulk is mad at things. Whereas Superman and Captain America are both about what they value and what they support and what they want to bring into the world. The Hulk is about what's wrong. The Hulk wants a revenge. The Hulk wants justice. So if you're angry, if you rant, if you just go off on a tangent about everything that's unfair and unjust and evil and wrong with the world, the Hulk is the character that you want to sort of embody, right? Now, the trick with the Hulk is he's justified in his rage because it's usually somebody being wronged or oppressed in some kind of way, and then the Hulk comes out and is like, rah, and he fixes it by punching things. But the trick with the Hulk, to temper that anger, it's about accidentally becoming the Hulk, right? Like, Dr. Banner had tons of rage, and then he got dosed with radiation, and then the rage came out in a way that manifested, but he didn't choose it. He didn't want superpowers the way Captain America did. He didn't sign up for it. It happened as an accident. So when you have this rage character, it needs to be like, I didn't want to be the guy who has to yell about this because I'm so mad, but no one else is doing it, so it falls to me, so I'm going to do it. That's, again, it's an element of that monomyth from Joseph Campbell's work, The Reluctant Hero. But it works really well to offset that anger and rage, to where if you want to be ranting and raving and just yelling about things that make you upset, you need that side to temper it. It needs to be accidental. Like, I didn't want to be the guy to get in front of you and be mad about this stuff, but it just sort of fell to me because no one else was doing it. Another element of the Hulk, he defends the weak, meaning the people that can't defend themselves. So this positioning is sort of just the same as Superman, to where you're just vastly more powerful and skilled than the people that you serve in your audience. Whereas Superman does it to be like, I want you to see your potential and do good things. The Hulk is like, you've been being oppressed and it's wrong, and I'm here to bust it out of there and kick your ass and be mad, get angry. Whereas Superman's like, we're good. Good deal. Superman doesn't get mad. The Hulk is nothing but mad. The Hulk is also about, like, that Promethean idea of sticking it to the man, about vengeance, about doing what's right by force if you have to. And the final element of the Hulk that I think is valuable is, again, he's got an extremely humble and weak secret identity, right? Dr. Banner is doubtful, he's scared, he's fearful, but he kind of likes having the rageful character. And I think, again, if you want to be this character of vengeance and righteous anger in your market, having that meek and humble secret identity like Dr. Banner helps. And again, that's why it's important you let people inside and see these true aspects of yourself that are sort of behind the scenes of your work. Next, we have Batman. Everybody knows Batman, right? The trick with Batman, like so many marketers identify with Batman. He's like the #1 marketer hero. And I think it has to do with maybe because he's rich. So like even his secret identity is aspirational, you know? Not only do you get to be a badass like Batman and beat up criminals, but also when you're not being Batman, you live in a mansion, drive fancy cars, and fool around with lovely women. But the trick with Batman, and again, only the audience, only the comic book reader knows this about Batman. And that's the trick with the material that we're talking about producing for your audience, is that we're letting them in on the secret identity. We're letting them behind the curtain. But the trick with Batman is that his driving force is tragedy, right? His parents were murdered in front of him when he was a kid. The reason he dedicates himself to fighting crime is because he never, ever wants any other kid in Gotham City to suffer from that same fate. That tragedy has given him this kind of obsession to where he's so driven that none of the other stuff that he accomplishes in his life means anything, and he will literally be Batman until he dies doing it. At least you get that idea. If you follow the comics, all kind of wacky things have happened to Batman in his pursuit of doing what he needs to do to fulfill his drive. But the trick is combining that tragedy, that personal tragedy, with a kind of obsession that makes you into a hero. So a real-life figure that I think fits this mold would be John Walsh, who's the guy who did America's Most Wanted as a TV show. I don't know how many people know this about that show and that guy. His son was abducted and murdered, and that's how he got involved in doing a show like America's Most Wanted. Like, it drove him that he never wanted that to happen again, where, you know, somebody could kidnap a kid and kill him and get away, and you never know what happened. So he made it a crusade. That's a good way to look at Batman. Is he's on a crusade. It's not just something he would like to do. It must be done, and he will break himself against the rocks of reality to make the world that he wants exist. A more just world, a more fair world, where innocent people don't get hurt. And again, you don't have to take up a mantle of righteousness in that particular way. Like, it doesn't have to, like, if you don't have a personal tragedy like your parents getting murdered when you're a kid, you don't have to exclude yourself from using the Batman mold. But there should be some terrible thing that happened that just moved you so much you had to do something about it, to the point where maybe sacrifices are being made in your real life because you're so dedicated to that cause. And you see this again in a lot of real life figures that are dedicated to a particular art or task or activity, and like their personal relationships suffer because they're so dedicated to what it is that they do for their audience. That's the Batman role. Another trick with Batman, his expertise is not necessarily superpowers, right? He's a regular guy that has accomplished what he's accomplished through the use of tools and intelligence and dedication to develop skill. That is a message that resonates with a lot of audiences, to where you're like, I know it seems like I'm super advanced at what I do. I wasn't born talented. I had to work hard. I had to, put 10 years in working. I had to develop all of these tools. I had to become an expert in all of these different avenues before I accomplished it, but I'm here to help you do it because of these shortcuts and tools I've created, right? That is a key element of portraying that Batman character, is that, like, I'm not superhuman the way maybe some of the other guys in my field are. I'm a regular guy like you. I'm just super effective at what I do as a mortal, right? Like, I'm not I'm not godlike. I don't have superpowers. I just work really hard and have the right tools for the job. Um, Batman's also mysterious. So while being a controversial figure in your market, if you have that sort of secret origin story that you don't necessarily beat anyone over the head with, but it kind of stays in the background, and if anyone looks it up, it's obvious, but you're not constantly harping on that. So again, to go back to John Walsh and America's Most Wanted, it's not like every episode opened with, I'm John Walsh and my kid was kidnapped and now I fight bad guys. That really wasn't part of it. That was like his secret drive, and people would interview him about it, and obviously would come up in interviews, but it wasn't a core part of his work. It was there, and people knew about it, but that wasn't the drum he was beating. He was mysterious. You're like, who is this guy? What, like, why does he care? And then you hear the story, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. That mystery comes from not totally keeping everything secret, but just not making a big deal out of what the tragedies are that are driving you to do what you're doing. Don't put it out there, but make it available, if that makes sense. Then you have the trick with Batman is that he, like the Hulk, is about what he won't stand for. He's about what won't be tolerated, what won't be allowed to happen. He's fighting the negative as opposed to like just doing wonderful positive things. It's a little bit dark, a little bit angsty. So if you're in that mode, if you're a little bit dark and a little bit angsty, the Hulk and Batman are character types that should appeal to you, where if you're a positive, upbeat kind of person, Superman and Captain America are probably going to appeal to you more. Continuing on, we've got a couple of more. It's already 3, but the show can sometimes be a little long. Unlike when I used to have a show on a quote-unquote network, I don't have to get off the microphone until I'm done. So we're going to keep going until we finish. We have 2 more that I wanted to cover. Obviously, there are millions of superheroes, but the next one is my favorite, the one that I personally identify with the most, and that is Spider-Man. And we talked a little bit about Spider-Man at the beginning of the show. What audiences love about Spider-Man is that he is weak in real life. Like, even though he has superpowers, he can't tell anybody. He can't share it. So he has to be weak Peter Parker. He has to be picked on. And even though he could punch a bully in half if he wanted to, he still gets picked on. And if he could only show girls the powers that he has, they would like him. But he doesn't get to, so he still has to be awkward Peter Parker that doesn't know how to talk to the girls. And so many people associate with that, and it creates that like I said, that over-the-shoulder view into people's lives. So like previous characters like Superman. Superman's secret identity is Clark Kent. He's a successful reporter at the biggest newspaper in the biggest city in the world. Captain America is a soldier, very decorated, very active, very good at what he does, recognized for who he is in real life. Batman, secret identity is a billionaire playboy, right? Like, even his secret identity is amazing. A character that I didn't talk about in detail here is the Green Lantern. Green Lantern's secret identity is like he's a top secret test pilot. So even in his day job, he's like pretty damn awesome. You know, he's a guy people look up to as a normal guy, and then he got superpowers. Whereas Spider-Man's a nobody, man. He gets beat up. He doesn't get the chicks. No one wants to be Peter Parker. No one looks up to Peter Parker, but everyone looks up to Spider-Man. So it creates that peculiar over-the-shoulder effect where you get to see him learn how to be a hero. That's the trick with Spider-Man. He's not already a hero whose adventures you get to live vicariously through. It was a totally new kind of story where you were watching him learn how to do it. You watched him learn the consequences of having these powers and using them irresponsibly. You get to learn why he needed a secret identity, because the people around him, once people learned he was Spider-Man, people would come after the people he loved and hurt them, and he wouldn't always be able to protect them, so he kept his identity a secret. And again, the trick is that the audience, the readership, knows this secret. You know his secret. He's letting you behind the scenes. So I'm not saying when you're portraying these characters and using these angles in your own marketing, you're not keeping the secret identity part a secret, but you're positioning it as if you don't publicize it. That's one of the grand tricks that marketing guru experts use, is that they'll do these videos where it seems like they're letting you in behind the scenes, but you're not behind the scenes. It's still the staging. Like there's a famous old video you can find of David Ogilvy, the famous copywriter, and he walks into the room and takes off his coat and rolls up his sleeves on his dress shirt with his necktie, and he sits down and he starts talking to you like your buddies. That video is not a behind the scenes video. It's a produced video. He's creating an illusion where he's letting you behind the scenes to see how he really is. And that's one of the reasons why I think he's a famous figure. Not because of how great his copy was, though it was great. It's because he created these environments where he let people in behind the scenes to see how he really was. Quote unquote. He was portraying it, but that's why people connected with him, is because there was something there behind the scenes. Another trick with Spider-Man is that there's nothing he's ashamed to show the audience, if that makes sense. Like, he's ashamed of being a nerd and getting picked on, but from the audience's point of view, he's not scared to share that with you. He's not scared to show you his failures and his weaknesses, because he's learning along the way. And that takes a lot of courage to do, but it's extremely powerful. So if you're in a position where you're acquiring the skill you need to build your audience, you don't have to wait to start building the audience until you're already Superman. If you take the Spider-Man role and position yourself that way, bring people along for the ride, build them up from where you're starting at, and then learn as you go and show them that you're getting better as you go, it's very beneficial. That's a mold that you can follow, where you do have the superpowers, you are having adventures that they can enjoy vicariously, but it's sort of seat of the pants. They're following you into the territory as you learn it yourself. And that's why you're heroic, is because you're just like them. You're just trying to do things that they don't think that they can do yet. So that's Spider-Man. Always been my favorite comic book character. The only comic book I ever subscribed to as a kid, where they would like mail it to me. And then finally we have, I guess, sort of the superhero character that kind of rebooted superhero movies as a thing, due to the wonderful characterization by Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man. Now, Iron Man, again, it's funny, you can look at a lot of superheroes and see how they're copies of each other for different companies. So how Captain America is Marvel's version of Superman, Iron Man is Marvel's version of Batman, right? Because Tony Stark, like Bruce Wayne, is a multimillionaire playboy in his day job, and then he is Iron Man as a superhero. Unlike Batman, it's not a secret. Everyone knows Tony Stark is Iron Man. So he flaunts it openly. So that's a little different. But Tony Stark doesn't necessarily have the angst of Batman. He's not driven. He's not obsessed. He's not fueled by this tragedy that haunts him, right? He's a little bit guilty about having powers that were used for evil at one time, so he's almost like working a penance. So there's that element of sacrifice, that he gave up all this profit in order to do the right thing. So there's that little bit of Prometheus in there, that little bit of Bodhisattva mixed in. But he's powerful and profitable and unapologetic about it. But he's a good guy by choice, and he's fun and charming to hang out with. That's what people like about that character, is that unlike Batman when he's being Bruce Wayne, like, he's intimidating. Stark is kind of intimidating, but he seems super fun to hang out with. He's got buddies, they do fun stuff, he's approachable and humorous in a way. In Batman, the secret identity part, Bruce Wayne, there's almost nothing there. Bruce Wayne is the mask. He's really Batman, and he only maintains being Bruce Wayne to, get the money he needs. Whereas Iron Man, like, he is Tony Stark in an Iron Man suit. Like, he enjoys being himself. The secret identity is really almost more of the character that you get to know, and he puts on the suit when he has to work, you know? So that's a slightly different perspective. Um, but again, he does the right thing because it's the right thing to do. He cares about people, and he uses his vast skills and knowledge and all of that stuff to benefit people. And you learn about why he's doing it, and you come to trust him through the way he portrays himself and his relationships as Tony Stark, right? Like, Iron Man's a good guy because of how Tony Stark treats his girlfriend and his friends and, like, the little kid he meets in Iron Man 3 and all of those kind of things, right? Like, whereas Superman, Superman's a good guy because even though he's Superman, he'll stop and rescue a kitty out of a tree. Tony Stark's a hero because of his real life stuff that he does. And that's just an interesting aspect. Now, that was the last superhero we had to discuss, but the reason I broke those characters down into those different elements is so you can see how really it's like a grab bag of elements. Some of them have things in common, some of them have things that are different, yet more characters are like a little bit of that guy, a little bit of this guy, and it's recombined. But really, all of these elements that we talked about are in Joseph Campbell's work about the hero with a million faces, 1,000 faces, I think. All of these little elements interplay and interconnect, and that's what these superhero stories are built out of. So which factors would these characters resonate with you in real life? How can you recombine them to create your own superhero? As long as you're doing what we said, where you have your superpowers, your work, your skill, what you actually do to produce results, and then you have your secret identity, which is behind the scenes, the person you really are, why you're doing it, why you're motivated to do it. And the structures in any kind of guru, quote unquote, guru type expert marketing should have both of those elements. You should have the big public superhero, superpower figure, and then you allow people who are interested and want to learn more, when they ask for more, when they get on your list, when they start reading your blog and your post and your group or whatever it is that you have, where they can come in and say, yes, I want more. When they come deeper in, that is when you sort of let them in on that secret identity. You start showing them behind the scenes and the values behind what you do, the villains that you fight, not just on the big stage, but your personal ones, your personal challenges and obstacles that you overcome, so they can connect with you where they are and see, okay, well, he's just like me, but also a superhero. I want to be a superhero, so by watching him, following him, listening to him, doing what he says, I can close that gap and get my own superpowers. Because if he can do it, I can do it, because you're showing them what behind the scenes is like. That's pretty much it for this week. That's kind of what I wanted to cover. And the goal was, I know last week with the persona thing, a lot of people really liked the show, but it was a little kind of mumbo-y, jumbo-y, and esoteric. And I know I started out this week with that, with the Bodhisattvas and the Prometheus and whatnot. But I wanted to anchor it in something in pop culture, so you can see it's not just like business guys who are doing this kind of stuff, real life people, but you can even see it in pop culture and the fiction that we love. We are trained from the time we're children to look up at these kinds of characters. So I guess if I was giving homework, your homework this week would be to like look around you, look at people who position themselves as experts, as leaders, as advocates of all kinds of things, politicians, business leaders, thought leaders, actors, guest stars on Saturday Night Live, people who get interviewed in profiles. A lot of times when celebrities will get interviewed in a deep kind of profile, I haven't read Playboy in years, but I always used to really like their interviews because they were about letting you behind the scenes of this particular celebrity who maybe plays a certain kind of character over and over. What are they like in real life? That's what people wanted to know. And that's why a lot of these celebrities have this longevity and the staying powers, not just because they're good on screen portraying the character, but the person they are underneath really connects with people. Now that I mention it that way, that's sort of why Tom Cruise had all that backlash when he fired his publicist and started letting people behind the scenes into his crazy Scientology lifestyle. It broke the spell because his secret identity was nothing normal people could relate to, whereas they loved living vicariously through his characters on screen that he would portray, these heroes. When they came behind the scenes, it wasn't what they wanted. They wanted a humble, real, normal guy. That's not what he was putting out there. There was a reason his publicist had kept him mysterious, very Batman-like, because the reality that he decided to show broke the spell. Like we said, it didn't click with the audience that he had built up, which again is why it's valuable to do it Spider-Man style for a while if you're just starting out, because then the audience you have is built up on who you really are as you grow into your superpowers. But hopefully this episode has been useful, and if not useful, at least interesting, and if not interesting, at least a little bit funny. And if not even funny, hopefully you like comic books and listening to people talk about them. Otherwise, you probably haven't gotten very much out of this episode. This being the end of the episode, this is where I would normally have an advertisement of some kind to go along in this spot. I don't have anything that I'm currently promoting myself, but pay attention in the future because it will be possible for you to get this spot to put your own ad as the audience grows for the show. But hey, we have time for that. We're only on episode 2. So closing out the show, once again, I'm your host, the Reverend Dr. Sir Colin D. Terrio, Pontifex Maximus of the Cult of Copy, a secretive organization dedicated to the discussion of persuasion and marketing and influence and all of those devious kinds of subjects. If you would like to join our ranks, our current discussion forum is on Facebook, and the shortcut to get there is cultofcopy.com. This show is our weekly web show where I dive into various topics of interest to our aims, and new episodes are recorded Thursdays at 2 p.m. on this channel, which is youtube.com/user/cultofcopy. You can get new episodes there and watch the old episodes we've already done. Hopefully you will join us next week for a live taping. If not, if you are listening to a recording of this show, whether it be on YouTube or in the near future, it will be available on iTunes or Android. If you like what you've heard and want to hear more, please click the subscribe button, however that may be represented on whatever you are listening to us on. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining me, and as always, have a great week until I talk to you next Thursday. Adios.